What are your thoughts on the first night in the tomb? How much do you know about what happened that night? What is the pain of the grave's first night? Is everyone going to be tortured that night? These are crucial and audible questions for the majority of people. Remain tuned. The vast majority of people, particularly Muslims, believe in the hereafter. They also believe that we shall be transported to another planet where our deeds will be assessed after we die. Strong faith and good deeds define the location of paradise, while infidelity and bad deeds determine the location of hell, which is the eternal home of human beings. As a result, we must exercise caution in our interactions with others. Every person considers death as the end of their life. Some people are terrified of thinking about death, while others are not. According to the second group, death is the start of a new existence, albeit in a different location. Because humans have no concept of death, they are terrified when they hear the term on the first night of the burial. But what is the first night of the grave? The first night of the grave is when the body is buried for the first time. From then on, his actions will determine whether this night will be peaceful or filled with the torture of the tomb. The significance of the first night of the burial has been discussed in numerous verses and hadiths. They ask the dead questions on the first night after the burial of two angels who are divine agents. Some activities, such as the survivor's fear prayer for the dead, have an impact on the corpse as it passes through the night. Of course, as previously stated, everyone's first night in the grave is different, depending on our activities in this life, how we lived, whether we followed God's commands and religious teachings, and whether he was a disciple of the Prophet. Infallible Imams. Did we make a distinction between right and wrong? We weren't there, and so on. What are the first moments of entering the grave? Man will view his entire existence from childhood to death, including all events in the final moments of his life, as if it were a movie. At the end of his life, and when he returns to his God. The soul returns to the body on the first day after death, since man is so reliant on the world and his body, that it is impossible for him to feel sad for it. And when he is buried, he enters the grave with it. When a person is buried, he loses his connection to the world for good, and the first night after burial may be the most difficult or easiest night of a person's life. A night that cannot be avoided and is determined by human conduct and acts worldwide. The same unpleasant and spontaneous sensations that occur in a dying human being are referred to as death sorrow. In discussing those moments, Imam Ali says, secularists decline, and death gradually penetrates them, taking over all of their organs. The tongue remains deafeningly silent. He falls asleep amid his relatives, his tongue and ears failing slowly, but he stares around him at the faces of those who surround him. He sees and hears them, but he doesn't understand what they're saying. His eyes gradually fail, his spirit is separated from his body, and his body is left in the family as a corpse. People in his immediate vicinity are becoming afraid of being near him and moving away from him. It no longer consoles the bereaved or responds to the cries of the suffering. Then they take him to the cemetery and bury him, leaving him to his own devices. People believe that when the air darkens, it is the first night of the grave if there is no such thing as day and night in purgatory, as there is in the real world. According to Islamic scholars, the meaning of the grave is related to the purgatory realm, and the first night of the grave is the beginning of death, which has nothing to do with burying a physical body. According to narrations recorded from Imam Sadiq in this regard, the first night of a person's grave will begin the instant he dies, and the angels of interrogation will come to the corpse. The acts and beliefs of the deceased, in the grave and the level of his interest and dependence on the material world, have a significant impact on his situation in the grave. The first angel he encounters, after burying a body, is named Roman. Imam Sajjad greets this intimate angel of God in the book Sahifas Jadiyah, saying, Roman is the experimenter of the dead in the grave. The Roman angel gathers and categorizes the individual's worldly deeds and deeds before creating a file. It is preparing the same letter of deeds that will be presented to humans on the day of resurrection. According to this letter on the day of judgment, human deeds will be assessed. As a result, after evaluating the deeds, the Roman property instructs the other angels on how to treat the corpse, whether to be patient with it, or to punish it for its actions. What questions are asked of the corpse on the first night of the grave? The good and the bad are the two celestial angels, who come to the dead after the Roman angel, and are asked to ask the corpse questions. According to their tasks, they are put to the left and right of the body. If the corpse was a sinful human being, these two angels will appear with a horrible face, and will fill the grave with flames, and torment the corpse. If, on the other hand, the deceased is a person of faith and righteousness, these two wonderful angels named Bashir and the evangelist will come to him and ask him questions, and the deceased will respond with God's grace and care, as well as the gates of heaven and benefits. He will be greeted by the godly. On the first night after death, the deceased are asked whether they believe in God Almighty and His Prophet, who was their Imam and world leader, their religion, their book, where was their Qibla, and who were their companions. Some narratives claim that all humans have questions and answers on their first night in the dead, but others believe there are exceptions. People who are exempt from answering inquiries include saints, minors, and lunatics. Burial moments. Because the corpse enters the grave with a lot of anxiety and worry, it is advisable to place it on the ground twice near the grave, and wait for a few minutes before burying it. This delay helps the corpse to accompany the corpse. The new surroundings are more familiar, making the terror and anxiety bearable. The body should not be left alone immediately after burial, because he or she still does not know the new world, and is afraid of it. But unfortunately, the mourners are thinking of taking care of the mourners, and leaving the corpse in those difficult conditions. On the other hand, after burial, even for a short time, some people should stay by the grave, and recite the Quran in supplication for her forgiveness, and help her answer the good and bad questions by re-indoctrination. One question that arises here is, how do people not buried in the ground spend the first night of the grave? Some people think that if the body is not buried in the ground, there will be no more torment, and the unbelievers will not come to the dead. However, when the soul is separated from the body, man is considered dead. He steps into another world. For example, if someone is completely burned in a fire and no trace of his body remains, or if someone is drowned in the sea, and his body is not found, despite the fact that he was not buried in the ground, but the pressure of the first night before, and refusing to answer questions and denying remains in place. As a result, even if the body's pieces are disintegrated by God's will and power, each member speaks and is answerable to God for her actions in the world. The anguish of the first night of the grave, according to religious academics, is the gateway to the purgatory world, and the deceased's burial is not required to complete the first night of the grave. The soul adores its body and remains on top of it until the final moments before burial. He is near his body by transporting, moving, and bathing it, and for a time he is present on top of his grave, and even travels to his place of habitation in this world. The soul's link to the physical body does not completely evaporate after death, but there will be a slight connection between the purgatory soul and the physical body, which is the corpse. Therefore, there are many principles and rules about the earthly grave: how to bury the body, observe the sanctity of the grave, visit the graves, pray, ask for mercy and forgiveness for the dead, over their grave in Islam. The pressure and torment of the grave. After the burial of the deceased, events and happenings happen to him on the first night, which is the torment of the pressure of the grave. The prophets and imams always asked whether the pressure and torment of the grave included all human beings. Abu Basir asks Imam Sadegh, is there anyone among human beings who is safe from the torment and pressure of the grave? And the Imam replied, I seek refuge in God from the pressure of the grave. Count.
Is the torment and pressure of the grave enough to break the bones? Humans always have a particular belonging to the world, and it is difficult for them to separate from worldly affairs. For this reason, at the time of death, the soul is still dependent on the world, and the separation from his family bothers him. In addition to the dependence of the soul on worldly affairs, the good and bad of human behavior in the world also affects the difficulty, ease, and low and high pressure of the grave.
Humans see the result of their actions, according to their behavior in the world. If a person is a believer, death will be exceptionally comforting for him, because he has gone to the God and is happy with his journey. The pressure and torment of the grave prepares man to enter the purgatory. Believers will be severely punished for staying in the purgatory, because of the wrongs they have committed in the world. If a person named Sa'd ibn Wad, who mistreated his wife, when he died and was buried, the pressure of his grave was so great and severe that the Holy Prophet said that the sound of breaking his bones could be heard. Recommended acts for the first night of the grave. On the first night of burial, the charity and righteous deeds of the survivors reduce or remove the torment of the grave from man. Prayers and appropriate actions to help the first night of the grave include reading Quran. It is recommended to read the verses of Yas, Al-Rahman, Tawheed, Safat, etc. in order to calm the corpse. Forgive the dead by reading these verses. Also, recite Surah Al-Qadr 7 times above the tomb.
Reading the verses of Tabarak al-Mulk. It has been narrated from Imam Sadegh that the verses of Tabarak should be recited over the grave of the dead in order to remove the torment of the grave from him. This surah is the savior of the person on the first night of the grave. Recitation of Ashura pilgrimage. Before sunset, perform the pilgrimage of Ashura, and offer its reward to the soul of the deceased. Give alms. The Prophet advises that whenever you give alms to a dead person, 70,000 angels carry that alms to his grave, and it is in the hands of each of the class angels who say, hello, this is a gift from someone to you. Then his grave will be illuminated. Pray for the dead. It is better to remember him at the end of the prayer or recite the verses of the Quran, and ask for his forgiveness. Thank you for watching this video all up to the end. If you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe to receive notifications of new videos by clicking the subscribe button and the bell next to it.